It is June 25th. It's the PFF Forecast. We teased that we had a very special guest. Didn't want to overcommit because we weren't sure if he could make it, but he's here. Matthew Coller is here. We're going to talk about the NFC North. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've got Quibi shows at the end as well. And we're going to start, Matthew, with something that is very near and dear to your heart. And Eric's, honestly, too. He's become a huge baseball fan. But Matt, it's great to have you on the show. If you don't know who Matthew Coller is, you should go check him out. Purple Insider is the show. The website is purpleinsider.substack.com. Matt, welcome, brother.
Thanks for having me. I am very excited to be here on this podcast, of which I always listen to. So glad to be on with you guys.
You're contractually obligated because you're one of Eric's friends, though. So, you know.
Yeah, I really couldn't say no, but I also checked my schedule before I came on and looked at the calendar on the Palm Pilot. And you know what? I had time. Turned out I had time.
So I was told that I have to ask you a baseball question to start. Baseball's restarting. I can't tell you how much I don't care, but you apparently have a rule regarding baseball games that I might appreciate.
Yeah. So one of the issues that I imagine you have, and I know Eric has with baseball, is that the games take forever. Though I think there's a new rule where relief pitchers have to pitch to 3 batters. That was going to be a rule, but I don't know if they're keeping it now with this 60-game thing. But I have my own rule. When I go to a baseball game here in the Twin Cities, Minnesota Twins, I will only stay for 2.5 hours, and that is it. I plan to stay for exactly 2.5 hours. So I go, get your food, sit down, settle in, enjoy a wonderful Minnesota evening. It's great in the summers here, and watch 2.5 hours of baseball exactly. And when it hits 9:30, 9:35 Central Time, I'm out. Almost anything could be happening on the field. The bases can be loaded. The guy could be throwing a no-hitter, and I'm probably still leaving.
It was so funny because the last time you were on the show, Matthew, you were in Cincinnati visiting our office. You know, we had your show on all the days, and we had you on the forecast. We went to a Reds game. We got a Yasiel Puig bobblehead, which is great.
Riding a horse.
3 days before he got traded, I think. And so we buy tickets. We go sit down, and you go, oh yeah, by the way, I only stay for 2.5 hours.
Yep. I refuse to stay any longer than 2.5 hours. It's mostly my own comfort. I mean, just sitting in a baseball seat, and I usually don't pay the premium prices for the seats, for more than 2.5 hours is just going to make my back and neck stiff. And I also get sort of bored or anxious, like, all right, can something happen here? And I invented this rule with my wife when we made a trip to New York City, and Joe Girardi was the manager of the New York Yankees. We go to a Yankees game, and it's, 7-1 in the 8th inning, and Joe Girardi is matching lefties and righties. It's just like, this has to end. It was 98 degrees in New York City that day, and he's calling for the lefty up 7-1, and the game, I'm not kidding you, took 4 hours for a 7-1 ball game. And it's like, I can't do this anymore. I'm too old.
There was a clue when baseball parks, remember they used to all suck. So I grew up in the Bay Area. And so the A's have like the worst stadium on the planet. Like, you would never go there on purpose. And the Giants built this really cool new stadium. It was awesome. The food was good. It was right on the water. And all these other stadiums start popping up where, like, the best part of going to the game has nothing to do with baseball. There's a swimming pool in Arizona. Like, that should have been a clue to people that was like, yeah, we have to build stadiums so cool that people will come to these games. My rule for baseball games is 0 hours. I refuse to go. So I could be convinced to abide by your rule if there is free alcohol involved.
Well, the one time we went to a game, George, in Cincinnati, we literally watched 0 innings.
I don't remember a single thing that happened. We
sat. I remember betting on the Reds and then being bad and not having to watch it. But yeah, it's unreal. Here's a question. So we're going to talk about the NFC North today. We're talking about human rain delays. Mm-hmm. Is the Green Bay Packers offense going to be a human rain delay this year?
Well, I don't know, because they're going to run the ball, right? So at very least, you're going to lose some clock there.
Are you? So I guess part of me is, and you'll notice I'm wearing, if you're watching this, I'm wearing purple and gold right now. I'm going full. I'm out Vikings in you guys. the fact that you started with the Packers gives me hope that we might talk about something else. My question with the Packers is they didn't get better, but did they get that much worse? So like, what could make them? Is the fact that they have AJ Dillon and they're going to run the ball a lot more, is that would make them a lot worse? And if so, like, I just don't know if I'm buying that actually happening. I almost feel like they're just going to be the same. They didn't get a lot better, but I don't know that they got that much worse because I just can't see them. You have Aaron Rodgers. You're not just going to run the ball with AJ Dillon all the time, are you?
The problem with being the same for the Packers is that the same is not going to be 13-3 again because they had so many of those close situations. And the same was a very mediocre offense and a good defense. But I've heard on this podcast a few times that defense doesn't matter. So, but I really do think that on the defensive side, that's where, if you're looking at it from a Vikings perspective, that's where the Packers still concern you, because Zadarius Smith is one of the elite defensive players in the NFL, because they have built up their secondary to be very good. And it seemed that Mike Pettin really had Kevin Stefanski / Gary Kubiak's number last year and knew exactly the right ways to pressure Kirk Cousins. And in both games, Cousins was downright abysmal. He could have won either one of those games pretty easily. Throws the first one away in week 2, and then in week 16 just does not show up whatsoever. And I could see that happening again. But on the offensive side, Green Bay just does not scare you anymore. And when we're talking about Aaron Rodgers holding on to the ball too long, that's perfect for the Minnesota Vikings defense, who will still find plenty of ways to pressure the quarterback. And I've always felt like there are ways that we never really talk about this with Rodgers, but there are ways to get Rodgers a little bit confused off of the line of scrimmage. And I think we look at it just like, oh, he's trying to do one of those things where he makes a crazy throw, or he's too scared to throw an interception because he doesn't want to be Brett Favre, which, maybe there's some truth to that. What I think, though, from watching a lot of games between Mike Zimmer's defense and Aaron Rodgers, is that he can be thrown off by a half a tick. And what he used to do back in the day was he would just roll out and make some crazy throw. But now when he's forced to play more of a Tom Brady type of stay in the pocket because he doesn't move as well as he used to. I mean, I went back and watched a game from, I think it was 2011, where he led the Packers in rushing, and he was running all over the place, making these crazy throws. He just is not capable of doing that anymore. And I think that is what limits him, because he isn't exactly that stand at the line of scrimmage, pick you apart on defense with his brain, as much as he was being really freakishly athletic and having that arm that is still great. But is it as great as it was like 8-9 years ago? I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, and we actually studied this. So 2019, Rodgers he graded below Ryan Fitzpatrick. If you look at plays where the defense was closed, had middle of the field closed, and then was open in coverage. So they showed something different than they played, or the opposite, open and then eventually were closed. He falls to like the middle of the pack in the NFL in terms of PFF grade. He's below, the top guys, Wilson, Watson, Mahomes, and Dwayne Haskins weirdly ahead of them as well. Kirk even graded better than Rodgers in that role. And I agree. I think that's one thing where I think teams have found his weakness, because, when he tries to play off script so much that, he's trying to diagnose the defense himself in the middle of like not playing within the structure of the offense. I think that eventually those things get discombobulated, especially as we talked about on this podcast. Their receiving core has gotten progressively worse since his MVP season in 2014.
That was the point I was going to make, because we talk about how, a quarterback making a high rate of positively graded plays is more incumbent on the opportunity, and a guy that can limit negatively graded throws, that's a sign of, look, he gets it. He's not going to do those regardless of the situation. He can avoid those things. And there was a year, I want to say it was 2014, where Aaron Rodgers was making a positively graded play like at 35% of his plays, something ridiculous. And last season, he was 23rd in positively graded play rate. And you think about Aaron Rodgers and you go, exactly what you said, Matt, like, I still have that throw on the sideline to
Jared Cook.
Yeah. Jared Cook, like emblazoned in my brain. Like, those throws are just so iconic. and you can't imagine that he doesn't have as many of those plays anymore. Would you chalk it up to the receivers? Because it almost seemed like now, if he scrambles out, you have faith in Monte Adams, but you have like zero faith in the rest of those guys. So maybe it's not as much Rodgers as it is just those guys have gotten way worse, which would make this draft even more concerning, I guess.
Yeah, I also think that there's just not the one single person that he truly trusts outside of Devontae Adams, like he had with Jordy Nelson for so long, that if he didn't like something that he saw, he would just fling it to Jordy Nelson. Those back shoulder throws to Jordy Nelson all the time where Nelson could use his big body and go up and get it. That player just has not been replaced. And Equanimous St. Brown and Lazard and these other guys that they have, these no-name type of receivers.
Geronimo Allison.
Yeah, right. And the fact that they haven't gone out and spent to find somebody who's at least proven to be an average or above average wide receiver really surprises me. And then in a draft like this, where you could actually get a receiver to step right in, even if he's the 5th or 6th receiver off the board. I personally listened to the 2-for-1 podcast with Renner
Great
and Gale.
show.
And that entire lead up in the draft, it was like, okay, well, should the Packers get this guy or that guy with all the receivers? Because it just made too much sense. You're in win now mode every time you have Aaron Rodgers, even if there are more flaws in his game than there were before. And to not get somebody who could likely in a historically great receiver draft step in and contribute, even if it's 40 catches or 50 catches, if you don't catch lightning in a bottle with a Terry McLaurin or something, and it's just someone who contributes, well, that's way better than getting another running back that you could probably replace in almost any round of the draft. So
Are you buying that? So my thesis is that Jordan Love is going to motivate Aaron Rodgers. And
no,
that makes
I'm
it a good pick. Are you buying that at all?
No, I'm not. No,
you're not scared as a purple insider. Are you at all cringing just a little bit that Aaron Rodgers is going to unleash wrath?
Do you think that this is just like an overreact? Like last season, there were 0 teams in the NFL that spent more money on quarterback, offensive line, wide receiver, and tight end than Green Bay. No team. And they were 10th in WAR generated by that group. So, like, is this maybe like a comeback to say, look, like tight ends, running backs, fullbacks are cheap. We've spent money on offense. We haven't gotten what we've paid for out of that. So now we're gonna be cheap in all the places, including eventually quarterback.
But that's driven a lot by the quarterback, and then they have a couple of high-priced linemen, right?
And Adams is highly paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the hard part is like when you look at, because Rodgers has become the poster boy for why you shouldn't pay an elite quarterback a lot of money, right? Because I think we can all agree that Jared Goff isn't worth his contract. I think we can all agree that it's touchy whether or not Carson Wentz is worth his contract. And then we can come back and agree that Russell Wilson's worth every penny, and eventually Patrick Mahomes will be worth every penny. But Rodgers is this like interesting case of a Hall of Fame quarterback and an MVP twice, not being worth the contract. And I think it's because, like, to the point like you guys are making, he just doesn't elevate the people around him. And maybe we overestimated him back when he had such great weapons. And now it seems like they're leaning further into the idea of not having him, giving him weapons.
Yeah, I think that we probably didn't overestimate how great he was because we watched it and we know how great it was. But he did have a good set of weapons before, and now it's just such a massive fall off after one guy. And I guess the question I would ask about that spending is, if you were given $35 million in cap space, would you spend it on Jimmy Graham and Billy Turner and whoever else, right? Like, would that be the way that you spend it? Probably not. I think you would probably go out and try to have a good number 2, a good number 3. And it's my theory, you guys have probably studied this, that I would probably rather have 3 above average wide receivers than 1 great receiver, which I think Adams is great. Maybe I just saw him go up against Xavier Rhodes too many times, but I think he is a great wide receiver. But when you have just 1, they can focus on that 1. And that 1 can only do so much damage unless it's Randy Moss in 1998. But aside from that, usually you need multiple really good wide receivers. And I've seen even with the Vikings, when they had 2 elite wide receivers in Diggs and Thielen, it was still a problem that the number 3 guy was Laquan Treadwell, and you didn't have that extra weapon to throw to because teams could put so much of their focus on those 2 guys in all the key situations. And so if you were going out to spend, I mean, I would have much rather, if I'm the Packers, spent on a good number 2 and a good number 3 rather than wash Jimmy Graham, who just contributed almost nothing to that team for the 2 years he was there.
Well, and there were plenty of like we saw in free agency. So say, because look, if you want to spend cheaply on players, then have them on the rookie contract, right? So draft them. Like, would you rather pay AJ Dillon that second round money or a receiver that second round money? You know, you're like the receiver. So, but regardless, even if you went out in free agency, a lot of those wide receivers came actually pretty cheaply. You know, so like I still don't see, I really still don't see the reasoning behind just abandoning that whole crew, especially when you look at the rest of the division. The team that I'm excited to talk about, the Lions, like that's exactly one of the reasons I like them so much, is they have a fairly deep receiving core. You know, they're not relying on one guy being awesome all the time.
Well, and that was, you know, Matthew last year when Antonio Brown was on the market. You know, you got a lot of flack for saying, you know, sure, the Vikings offensive line sucks, but like get into Antonio Brown on the team, and you have 3 receivers that can win in 2.5 seconds or less, and you really protect your offensive line that way. And you know what we saw in Minnesota is exactly the opposite of as George said, what I think we're going to see in Detroit, which is, you know, even when Thielen got hurt a season ago, they had Stephon Diggs, who was having a brilliant season, and really no second option. And that offense, like Kirk's numbers were really propelled by the October that he had, which was amazing. You know, one of the best Octobers we've seen in a long time. But aside from that month, they're basically an average offense, if not below average. And, you know, it's kind of, you know, you need guys that can win on the outside. And I think when you look at the top 2 teams now, you know, Green Bay and Minnesota, depending upon the sports book you look at, are favored in this division. Actually, Minnesota, if you look at Bet Online, Minnesota is actually a relatively overwhelming favorite. It's different other places. But I can't support, especially not Minnesota, but I can't support either team to win the division, given the fact that amongst them, they have 2 good wide receivers total in a league that requires you, you know, to have 3. I think, especially, you know, when we look at Green Bay and Minnesota last season, they were better than they should have been because they were ahead, and both teams got to play backup quarterbacks galore during the season. If either team takes a step back defensively or their schedule gets harder, those teams are going to be forced into passing situations. And we saw it with the Green Bay Packers when they went to Los Angeles to play the Chargers. We saw it in Minnesota when they had to go and pass the football against the 49ers in the playoffs. Like, if you don't have good wide receivers, it's over.
I think the difference probably between the 2 teams is that the Vikings have the potential to have other weapons in Irv Smith. Hard to say what Justin Jefferson will bring right away, but this is a guy who had as prolific of numbers from the receiver position coming out of the draft as anybody over the last number of years. And someone who, when I see that someone played out of the slot in college a lot, I look at it as a good thing, because in the NFL, you're playing a lot of condensed sets, you're moving around a lot, and that LSU offense had a lot of different formations. They did not just stand at the line of scrimmage with a quarterback and a 3-by-2 set or something with a spread offense. They did a lot of NFL type things. And Jefferson is a good athlete too, to be able to get him the ball and make plays and get easy yards for Kirk. And this is one of the differences between them is Rodgers, he got easy yards from Aaron Jones on the passing game for sure. But when it comes to the receivers or tight ends, the yards just didn't come very easy. You could, if you're Kirk Cousins, check it down to Irv Smith last year, and he still would give you 7-8 yards and a couple of big plays. Yeah. But I also think there's the potential for Irv Smith to take a huge leap forward here. And obviously this is because the Vikings drafted weapons and Green Bay didn't. So what's the potential for Green Bay to have their weapons get better and surprise us? It really doesn't exist. Whereas with the Vikings, that potential is there. And I would even leave the door open for someone like BC Johnson to get better. I think he's a better athlete than people realize, and he played outside wide receiver as a 7th-round rookie last year and had some success. That's not something you see all that often. So there's at least these players who are growing where I don't see that in Green Bay.
So so it's very interesting because you brought up the division. Who's should be favored to win the division, Eric? I mean, you see, it's close. It's different in some places. Here's how I would separate it. I'm curious if you guys would agree or disagree with this. Both teams have their flaws. I'm trying to make a decision between the two based on the answer to this question. I need one drive. I need a touchdown. Which offense would I rather have? The Green Bay offense or the Minnesota offense? Now, I'm not stoked on either, but I would rather have Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, that crew, than the Green Bay offense with Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, and who the hell else? Do you guys agree or disagree?
I know we just had Ben on last week. I don't. I mean, Kirk is Kirk, man. Like I just don't like. Let's put it this way: if he has the chance to like come back and win from behind, and he's not playing like Brandon Allen and the Denver Broncos, I just don't have a whole lot of faith in him. I think Rodgers can do. I mean, the playoff game against Seattle, Rodgers was brilliant, even though he had kind of a crap season. He has like, I think his high end variance is higher. And if you're trying to win a game on the last drive, you need that like upper tier ability. And yeah, I think Kirk, like on average, is probably the same quarterback, if not maybe a little better than Rodgers at times. Like he just doesn't have that thing. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Matthew, do you agree?
Well, one of the things that I love about your show and just PFF in general, the quarterback annual, is that it allows us to find the differences between guys who have the same quarterback rating, right? And so these two guys are 99 quarterback rating over the last 4 or 5 years. So they look almost exactly the same. But when we start to parse it out and we look at these other parts of it, and we look at Aaron Rodgers and how he's creating that by a lot of course, safe throws and not throwing interceptions, but also a lot of big time throws still exist in that arm. It may not be the same arm that threw it 75 yards in the air against Detroit for a Hail Mary touchdown, or the Cook throw that you mentioned, but you're talking about a guy who can still pull that trick out of the bag and do something special. And also somebody who's a much better straight drop back passer than Kirk Cousins. Everything with Kirk Cousins is let's mitigate his weaknesses. Let's find ways to boot him out. Let's roll him out. He does not have any athleticism in terms of running the football. I think PFF had him graded as the worst running quarterback in the entire NFL last year. Well, Rodgers can take off and get you 15 to 20 yards, which is a thing that usually in those big time situations has to happen. And I also do believe that there's an element with Kirk Cousins where he feels the pressure. And I've just seen it in person too many times to not believe that it's there. I'll give you an example. Seattle last year, Monday Night Football. He's got the 0 whatever record on Monday Night Football, which I wouldn't put too much stock in myself, but he's got an opportunity to go beat the Seattle Seahawks. This is not the 2013 Seattle Seahawks defense. And as he's driving them, he completes a short pass, but he gets to a situation where all he needs to do is, get a couple of first downs. Seattle's giving him opportunities. He targets Laquan Treadwell maybe twice, and then throws 5 yards short of the sticks to Irv Smith on 4th down, and the game is over. I mean, these are things that happen to Cousins a lot, where, as with Aaron Rodgers, you just believe he is in complete control of those situations. And even though he doesn't win them every time, just like Michael Jordan didn't make every last second shot, you would believe much more in those drop back situations with the defense forcing you to make a big time throw that Rodgers is going to get that done.
Rodgers is in complete control to the point where he can decide not to even throw it to a receiver. Whereas like Kirk is not in control at all. It's sort of, I don't know. It's like that Scott Erickson quote, once the ball leaves my hand, I have no control over it. I feel like, I don't know. I agree with George's premise that you're not in a good spot if you have either one of those guys at the end of a game. But I think
I have way more faith in Rodgers than I do Cousins. I just have very little faith in the Green Bay offense as a whole. And it doesn't have to be I think the end of the game, like last second drive, maybe makes it feel a little more in Rodgers' favor. But just on any random drive, like which one do I have more faith in scoring a touchdown? To me, Minnesota at least has Like what you just brought up about putting Cousins in a good position, that's a part of it though. Like, okay, they're going to run play action 32% of the time. That's great. Like, why does it, like Green Bay isn't doing that? And that's a problem. So I don't know. I think Green Bay has Rodgers has to overcome a lot of things. And I think Minnesota's scheme allows Cousins to do a few more things. And it highlights, I think, that Justin Jefferson is a pivot player, in this division. Like if he comes out and is really good, can change the complexity of this division. Are there any other guys, the Vikings draft, like in comparison to Green Bay's draft, it's very funny because they have a lot of guys that I think you're excited about. Are there any other guys there, Matthew, that you are particularly bullish on?
In the entire draft? Do you mean on the offensive side or just
for the Vikings in general in their draft?
Oh, well, geez. I mean, I would say that Cameron Dantzler is a guy that I'm really sort of intrigued by. It's harder to be bullish when I didn't cover OTAs or minicamp because usually you get your first look at someone. And even though that's not the most accurate first impression, you get the idea of what the coaching staff is thinking early on. That's kind of the way that you can read it by watching practice is this guy getting first team reps where he's mixing in as a rookie? That might tell you something good. Is he not? So it's a little harder to be accurate in this situation, but I love the fact that they went and got a guy who ran a terrible 40 that probably isn't really representative of his speed. I mean, sure, he's not the 4.38 of the video that they put out in the entire internet mocked, but he's probably not the 4.62 either when he can run down the sideline with Jamar Chase. And drafting multiple corners, pass and stop the pass is the way to win. And what did they do? They got a wide receiver in Justin Jefferson. They got two corners in Jeff Gladney and Cam Dantzler. Gladney, I think that there's maybe a ceiling there that is a little more limited, but with Dantzler, he could be a guy that just comes out and surprises us and is a starter in the first year. And that cornerback position is so wide open that he's the guy that really, he might swing it. I mean, if he can win that job and they can have even two rookie corners play decent football in their first year under Mike Zimmer, then you might be talking about a defense that's just as good as last year, but with a harder quarterback schedule. But if nobody rises to the challenge, then you're talking about Aaron Rodgers having some field days against the Vikings.
Yeah, and so I like the points you bring up that the Vikings, they have to incorporate 15 draft picks during a pandemic with no OTAs and be better than they were a season ago fundamentally, just to have the same results, given that their schedule is harder. On the flip side, let's get to a different team in this division. Detroit, I know that Matt Patricia's had has some warts, obviously, and has had a difficult time of it. But I look at this team, and I think there are less question marks about this team than there are of any team in the division. Matthew Stafford's health is one of them, but it was kind of a fluky injury, right? He has not been, injury other than his first couple of years in the league and last season. He hasn't been particularly injury prone. They have a trio of receivers that I think are as good as any in the NFL. And on defense, they go ahead and they get Jamie Collins, they get Desmond Trufant, they get Danny Shelton, Jaron Kearse, a former Viking, Reggie Ragland, a former Chief. Like I think that this team has a much better shot of competing for this division than anybody gives them credit for.
Can I tell you something that I would love to bet on? So the win totals for these teams I think are really interesting. Green Bay's at 9, Minnesota's at 9. I'm assuming vomit emojis from both of you on those in terms of going over. Chicago's at 8.5. Detroit is at 6.5. If someone offered me, I would love to know the odds that I could get from someone on Detroit having more wins than Chicago. Because I look at these two teams and they're both not fantastic. But in comparing them player for player, I'm just I laugh at this. Matt Stafford is dramatically better as a quarterback than either of the two guys that Chicago trots out there. Kenny Golladay is awesome. Marvin Jones is really good. You have Danny Amendola in the slot. Their defense, I know they got rid of Darius Slay. They brought in Trufant. They draft Okudah. Julian Okwara is a guy that, I think will be a value there where they got him as a pass rusher.
They added Trey Flowers last year.
So I don't know, man.
Dustin Coleman.
if there's one thing that I look at this division and I go, I'm going to bet on this happening in this division, it's Detroit winning more than 6.5 games. And I'll take Detroit at, let's see, what are they?
To make the playoffs, they're plus 320, which I think is a joke, given that there are 7
plus
NFC
600
playoff
to win
teams.
the division.
Yeah, there are 7 playoff teams this year, which I think is always, usually you want to bet the no on a lot of these props, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of to make the playoffs, like if you bet a bunch of plus 250 or higher teams to make the playoffs, you're going to hit on a couple this year, because we just Duck Hodges would have taken Pittsburgh to the playoffs had there been 7 playoff teams last year. So the idea that Stafford can't, and they drafted TJ Hawkinson in the top 10 last season. That's an offense that is pretty good. And you had Darrell Bevell in the second year of the system. I agree with you. I think Detroit is at least better than Chicago and should, they led Green Bay for every single minute last year in both games. They lost both because of randomness and stuff. But I don't know, man. I think that's going to be one of the more intriguing underdogs this year.
Our simulation has Detroit winning over 7.5 games, basically getting to 500 more often than Chicago does. So I'm vindicated there. Thankfully I was not being ridiculous. But one of the interesting things, and this was the story of Detroit last season for anyone that didn't watch, was when Matt Stafford was healthy, they went totally turned their offense around. So it was, Matt Stafford has a pretty decent arm. They were having him throw a bunch of short passes before. And then last year they said, you know what, screw it. We're gonna run a lot of play action. We're gonna go downfield. We have these 2 big receivers, and we're gonna let him go up and get it. I think his average depth of target was over 12. He was leading the league in positively graded throws. I mean, it was awesome to watch. And they had Kansas City. I've talked about this game a ton. They had Kansas City on the ropes. Obviously, this is the eventual Super Bowl champion. And to me, that says a lot about a team. People have forgotten that. People generally view the Lions as this downtrodden organization. And you've got organizations with a bunch of big names in the Packers, the Vikings, and the Bears. I just feel like people are sleeping on the Lions.
Yeah, I think so too. And they have all the earmarks of a team that goes from worst to first. They have a quarterback coming back from injury, which, you might know something about this in San Francisco.
I do. Thank you.
Jimmy Garoppolo coming back, a high draft pick that could make an impact right away in Jeff Okudah. And they spent in free agency to really fill out that roster. Normally, adding a nose tackle is not that exciting, but the version of Snacks Harrison that we saw last year was an injured and maybe unmotivated because he didn't like his coach type of version. Mm-hmm. And so they bring in Danny Shelton, who's pretty good there. Jamie Collins is a guy who would understand maybe Matt Patricia's style of coaching, but that's still going to be the biggest question for me, because everything checks every box for Detroit for being that team that, you would bet 100% of the time over everybody else for them to go over 6.5 versus the Vikings 9 or the Packers 9. Except for the coaching. When every player who leaves says the head coach is a major problem and we couldn't get along with him and his defensive scheme was awful and didn't fit us at all. And last year, their defense is brutal. Their defense is brutal 2 years ago when he was brought in to replace Jim Caldwell to be that guy. So even with more talent, do they get mostly the same results out of their defense? I would still question whether he can get them anywhere, whether he's even an NFL caliber head coach. And I think that's a big question. I look at coaching as one of those things that, is very volatile, of course. But if you have someone like Mike Zimmer on defense or Andy Reid on offense, you are consistently raising the level of expectation for your team. And with Patricia, he's like the exact opposite of whatever I would view Andy Reid's offense or Mike Zimmer's defense, where I sink them by X number of points or X number of wins because he's their head coach. But on paper and on their roster, on their depth chart, they should absolutely be considered the most talented team. And the Chicago point is an interesting one too, because you just look at the rest of the division and it's there for the taking for anybody who wants it. And I don't know Cam Newton's health. I have not examined him personally, nor my doctor. However,
we do have a doctor on the show.
We do, yes. But I don't believe that I would want him examining Cam Newton.
At least not Cam Newton.
But if you're selecting between Nick Foles and Cam Newton and you pick Nick Foles, what are you doing? I mean, just like, what is the logic? What's the thinking there? I mean, even with Chicago not telling Teddy Bridgewater he could have the job and instead saying, no, you actually have to beat Mitch Trubisky to win this job. Bridgewater, I think, would have been perfect for an offense where you stand in the shotgun and throw a lot of short passes and pick a defense apart. And they decide to go with Nick Foles instead. And I think they just signed themselves up for 7-9. They just wrote it in. Like, as soon as they made that deal, 7-9.
Can I tell you my conspiracy theory here?
Okay.
The Chicago Bears picked a quarterback they thought Mitch Trubisky had a better chance to beat out. They still want him so badly to start, so badly. And this is who said this? Was it Ted Ginn? Was like, he thinks Trubisky is going to be the guy that starts for the Bears. The Bears want Mitch Trubisky to win the starting job. So they picked a guy. He's not beating out Cam Newton. He was motivated by Nick Foles. He sees Cam Newton like at a distance and walks the other way. This was a guy that was turning off the televisions in the practice facility. Like, he sees Cam Newton just in the distance and runs away scared.
Here's an underrated part about the Bears. Last season, 2 of their 4 most valuable players were Prince Amukamara and HaHa Clinton Dix. Both of those guys are gone. Eddie Jackson's a really good safety. They chose to keep him. That's fine. Khalil Mack's a great edge player. Unless the rest of the division stinks offensively, which is a good chance, they're going to be bad. I don't think they're going to be all that great defensively anymore. Mm-hmm. They're going to be incorporating Jalen Johnson. He's going to have a big role, but he's a second round. Artie Burns is a guy they brought over from Pittsburgh. And he's bad. Jimmy Graham, the tight end, Cole Kmet, like, they're just, I think Matt Nagy runs laps around Matt Patricia, but like, he has nothing to work with here.
Yeah. No,
they're not good. And like, Foles, if we know anything about Foles, I have a ton of respect for Foles. I think he's gutty. I think he comes up big in big games. He's like, I don't know. I enjoy watching him, but this has like 2015 St. Louis Rams Nick Foles written all over it. And that's Chicago's be 4-12 if that happens.
We've said this before, and I'll say it again because Bears repeating, like, this is why the Khalil Mack trade, and you never want to be a revisionist history guy, but there was a very large chunk of outcomes where Mitch Trubisky stunk. And if you invest all of those draft picks in Khalil Mack, he's taking you from 4 wins to 5 wins, from 6 wins to 7 wins, instead of 12 to 13, 10 to 11. And that was what we warned people of when they traded for Khalil Mack. You don't know about Mitch Trubisky. You actually don't. You have no idea. He's been bad so far. Why are you investing in him as being this guy going forward? And now they're in a situation where they're going to pay for it because Khalil Mack's going to say, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. He's also super expensive. You need to replace your quarterback. And then even if you bottom out, and Khalil Mack's going to make that harder to happen. Even if you bottom out, you don't have a whole lot of stuff to put around him because you've traded so much draft capital away. The Bears might be in as bad a situation, and I don't say this lightly, as any NFL team out there.
Well, when you sign up yourself for quarterback that has such a mediocre history, what's Nick Foles' career quarterback rating like? 84. And I was there for the NFC Championship game where he demolished the Minnesota Vikings and had one of the best playoff quarterback games ever. But that's not the Nick Foles you can expect. It's also not the supporting cast for Nick Foles that Philadelphia had. I mean, Carson Wentz in that same offense is an MVP because they had healthy receivers. Their offensive line was as good as anybody has been in the NFL in years on their offensive line. And that's not what Chicago is going to be able to give Nick Foles. So there's a pretty serious ceiling there. Or if Trubisky wins the job, then what? If you're Chicago, you're just like, okay, I guess what that means he's going to be the next great quarterback? Probably not. And as you guys have studied, yes, they still have some great players, Eddie Jackson, Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, Khalil Mack, but they don't have the complete defense like they did before. And I saw this with the Vikings over the last couple of years, that if you have a very high-end couple of players, but you have some weak spots, that the defense will just attack Xavier Rhodes over and over and over again, and you'll have more success. So even though the Vikings are a good defense, they're not a great defense when they don't have every player playing at a very high level. So if you're Chicago, you would hope, okay, well, the quarterback will pick us up on the other side, but not either one of these quarterbacks. And that's why I would love to know what the thinking is behind not getting someone like Cam Newton, where even if Cam Newton,
I'm telling you,
even if he blows out every bone in his body in the first week, at least you took a shot at being legitimately competitive.
I think it's ridiculous that he's not starting.
It strikes me as what the Vikings were like in like 2013 when Christian Ponder was their quarterback. You know he's not the guy, but because you bought into him, you're in week 4 and you have absolutely no hope. And hope is a lot of what these teams are selling. Speaking of hope, George.
Hold on. What are you bringing up right now? Because I had a question that I wanted to ask you guys. Are you taking us off of this Bears talk?
I think so. I mean, I was going to transition into the Quibi segment.
Okay. I just have one question before I get out of here. Is if you were drafting receivers from this division, would you take Kenny Golladay first? I would. Would you guys?
Yes.
Man, I really like their other guy, Marvin Jones. It might be because he's lit up the Vikings so much. Maybe I'm that team that sees someone perform good against my team and then I trade for them or sign them in free agency. But Marvin Jones contested catch situations down the sideline does it like nobody else. And I would also say, I mean, Adam Thielen is a complete route runner.
He is.
Who can do absolutely anything. He can line up anywhere. He can beat you off the line of scrimmage. He can go deep. He's got the great ball tracking deep. He can go underneath and make plays after the catch. I probably would still put Thielen at the top because he is that complete receiver. Although,
what about Devontae Adams?
Yeah, Adams right up there too. I mean, it's a good receiver division.
Here's my case. Marvin Jones, 8 catches, 20+ yards downfield. On throws 20+ yards downfield. Kenny Golladay, 16. Only guy higher, Stephon Diggs, no longer in Minnesota. Also, highest rate of positively graded targets was Kenny Golladay in the division. So I think that's one that would surprise people. I just wanted to know what you guys would think. Now we can transition. Eric, I'll let you transition.
Well, yeah, I mean, speaking of hope, Quibi gave us a lot of it, for the micro video market. So,
are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. So tell Matthew what the game is.
So here's what I'm going to do. Matthew, are you familiar with Quibi?
I am not.
Okay. Wow, you're not. I'm shocked. The whole world's supposed to know about Quibi. You'll enjoy, and if anyone out there listening does not know, you will enjoy the story of Quibi. Go look it up, read about it. It's hilarious. It's basically a company that the name is Quick Bites. They've combined it into Quibi, has poured over $1 billion into creating shows that are like less than 10 minutes long and is charging people a subscription to watch these shows. And it turns out they all suck. The content isn't very good, and they are catastrophically dying, and it's kind of funny to watch.
Okay, I do know what this is.
Okay, so
I wasn't sure if it was some soccer terminology or something.
No. So they have some ridiculous shows. All you have to do is look at their show lineup to find out why they're not doing well. So we play a game. I have 2 show descriptions here. I'm going to read you both. One of them is a real show that Quibi is making. The other one is fake. Your goal is to try and figure out which is which. I won last week. I had 3 shows. Eric and our guest, remind me of who the guest was because I'm forgetting now.
Baldwin?
Yes. Both of them got it wrong. Guessed a show that was fake. So we'll see if you guys can do it here. All right. Show number 1. Is it possible to read another person's thoughts? Mentalist Lior Suchard thinks so, and he's about to stun celebrities and passersby alike with his mind-reading prowess. All episodes of Gone Mental with Lior are streaming now. Next show. Having a six-pack seems like a lofty goal for many, especially for some former celebrities who have fallen out of shape. Instagram fitness sensation Joey Swole is Captain Crunch. Follow 5 different celebs as they try to go from flab to fab in 4 weeks. Episodes are streaming now.
I think the first one's a Quibi video because I think you are actually funny enough to come up with the second one.
I am going with the second one because I think that the first one sounded too real. The first one sounded like kind of legit. So I'm going second one, and Joey Swoll has to be a real person.
Joey Swoll is a real person. The show is made up, though.
Oh,
Yes.
I made up Captain Crunch. Gone Mental with Lior Souchard is available for all the people desperately hoping to go watch it. He's reading minds on the streets, I guess. Apparently is what it is.
Look at that compliment I paid you, and it was correct, George.
I was
Captain
really,
Crunch. Jeez.
So I was gonna do a Captain Kirk spin-off for you guys and do a third show that had Kirk Cousins in it. But I couldn't really think of anything that met my criteria. So you had to deal with Captain Crunch. But yeah, Quibi. That's the segment right there. Matthew, thank you for hopping on with us, buddy. This was a blast. For anyone that didn't catch us at the beginning, Purple Insider is your podcast. It's awesome. Eric and I have had the pleasure of being on there. It's fantastic. Even if you're not just a Vikings fan, Purple Insider, is it Substack? Is that what it is?
Yeah, purpleinsider.substack.com. People can sign up there.
Go listen to it. Matthew Coller, thanks, brother. Peace out.
Yeah, thanks for having me,
Back on
guys.
Monday.